Hey there, welcome to the real Wild West. Pull up a chair, because you're not about to get the Hollywood version tonight. Instead, I'm taking you straight into the heart of a world where every breath, every step, and every meal is a test of grit. Out here, legends aren't made by quick draws or barroom brawls. They're made by folks who manage to simply survive the night. And trust me, by the time you see what breakfast really looks like or find out why folks shook out their boots every morning, you might wonder if you'd last a day. If you find yourself caught up in this story and want more, feel free to tap like or subscribe, only if you're actually enjoying the ride. Let's make this a global campfire. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is, so we can see just how far this little frontier stretches. Now, dim those lights, get comfortable, and let's settle in for a journey that might just change how you see the so-called good old days. So, here you are, the American Wild West, sometime in the thick of the 1870s. You're not starring in a shiny cowboy movie. You've just woken up in a place where comfort is a word for city folks, and survival is the only game in town. And right away, your senses get hit by something Hollywood never shows, the smell. You might expect fresh pine or sweet prairie grass, but what greets you is a sour, heavy stench, unwashed bodies, a sharp bite of livestock waste, and a constant undercurrent of rotting refuse. It seeps into every crack of your cabin, and you realize that nobody's reaching for the soap. Bathing, if you can even call it that, is a rare luxury. Water is worth more than gold, and you're expected to ration every drop. Most folks wash up once a month if they're lucky, and plenty go the whole winter without so much as a splash. When you finally do bathe, it's a hurried affair in cold, grimy water, and you probably have to share that tub with the rest of the family. If you think your morning shower is rough, try scrubbing yourself with a rag and a bucket half full of muddy water while the wind whistles through the cracks. Dragging yourself from bed, you feel the aches and pains in every joint. Your mattress is nothing more than a rough sack stuffed with straw, crawling with bed bugs and fleas. The bugs are relentless, biting through the night, and the thin blanket you huddle under does little to keep out the chill. You shift, trying to shake off the stiffness, but your body's already tired. Out here, every day is a battle of endurance. No rest days, no cozy weekends. Whether you're tending crops, breaking rocks in a mine, or wrangling cattle, your hands are calloused and your back is bent long before you hit 30. You might think you've had hard days at work, but frontier life redefines exhaustion. Sun up to sundown, it's endless labor, digging, hauling, chopping, mending. Your tools are heavy and your muscles burn, but there's no such thing as taking it easy. Most settlers don't live to see old age. Bones break, joints seize up, and by the time you reach middle age, if you make it that far, you're stooped, grey, and worn thin. Throw your feet over the edge of the bed, and you're hit with another reality. The air inside your cabin is either biting cold or stifling hot. In winter, you're shivering as you pull on stiff, frozen clothes, your breath hanging in the air. There's no insulation, no central heating. If you're lucky, you've got a fireplace, but you let it burn down at night to save precious firewood. The bitter cold creeps into your bones, and you wake up with frost on your lashes. When summer rolls around, the heat is merciless. The cabin bakes like an oven, and sweat soaks your clothes before you've even started your chores. Speaking of clothes, forget about the soft, tailored outfits you see in westerns. You get 2, maybe 3 sets if you're lucky. Men wear tough canvas or old denim, shirts that scratch and chafe until your skin is raw. Women are trussed up in endless layers, chemises, corsets, petticoats, and long skirts that drag through dust and manure. Your clothes are always dirty, stiff with sweat and grime, and washing them means lugging buckets of water from the creek and scrubbing until your knuckles bleed. Those fancy, spotless get-ups from the movies. Pure fantasy for the likes of you. Your stomach rumbles, reminding you that breakfast is next. Don't get your hopes up. The Wild West menu is as unforgiving as the land itself. You grab a tin plate and find the usual beans, dry biscuits, and a bitter cup of what passes for coffee. If you're hoping for eggs or bacon, you'll be disappointed. Vegetables are rare and precious. Maybe you get a wilted potato if you're lucky. Scurvy, the disease that makes your gums bleed and your teeth fall out, lurks in the background, because fresh fruit is almost impossible to come by. The coffee is a special kind of punishment. Forget smooth, aromatic brews out here. It's boiled until it's black as tar and twice as bitter. Sometimes folks throw in crushed eggshells or a handful of salt to try to take the edge off, but it still tastes like burnt dirt. You gulp it down anyway, grateful for the jolt of caffeine that'll help you face the rest of the day. Before you even think about pulling on your boots, you give them a good shake. This isn't just a habit, it's a matter of life and death. Scorpions and snakes love to curl up in the warmth, and one careless moment could land you with a venomous bite miles from the nearest doctor. You tap the toes against the floor and listen for the telltale rattle or the thud of something nasty hitting the ground. Stepping outside, you're struck by how exposed you are. The frontier is vast and wild, the sky stretching forever, the wind cutting sharp. It's beautiful, sure, but it's also lonely and unforgiving. The weather can turn on you in a heartbeat, a blue sky in the morning, a deadly blizzard by nightfall. No warning, no mercy. If it isn't the cold or the heat that gets you, it might be a tornado, a flash flood, or a week-long drought that leaves your crops shriveled and your livestock dead. You might think the town offers a little relief, but don't let that fool you. Frontier towns are just as rough as the open range, and in some ways even more dangerous. Disease is everywhere. People don't understand how germs work, and there's no system for dealing with sewage or garbage. Cholera, typhoid, smallpox, diphtheria, tuberculosis. These are just part of daily life. When an outbreak comes, nobody is safe. Sometimes, half the town disappears in a few short weeks, and the survivors are left to bury their neighbors and move on. Let's say you need supplies and decide to head into town. As you get closer, you notice there's no pattern to the place. Buildings are scattered wherever they'll fit, built in a hurry by whoever got there first. There are no paved streets, just dusty tracks that turn to sticky mud when it rains. In dry weather, the wind whips up clouds of grit that sting your eyes and cake in your teeth. The smell is even worse here. Horses are everywhere, hitched to posts, tied to wagons, plodding down the middle of the street. Their manure piles up faster than anyone can clear it. In some spots, the muck is so deep you have to pick your way through it, boots sinking with every step. Flies swarm around you, drawn by the filth, buzzing in your ears and landing on your food. It's no wonder disease spreads so fast out here. You look around and realize that this is what passes for civilization on the frontier. A place where comfort is just a rumor and survival is never guaranteed. But don't get too comfortable yet. The real dangers, the ones that stalk you in the wild and wait for you in the shadows, are only just beginning to reveal themselves. As you walk down the main street, you pass the saloon, likely one of the busiest establishments in town. The next chapter, we're heading straight into the heart of those dangers, the isolation and the endless struggle to simply stay alive. Stick around, because things are about to get a whole lot rougher. You step out onto the main street, boots sinking into the dust, and right away it hits you. This place is nothing like the stories you've heard. The saloon squats on the corner, drawing you in with noisy laughter and the promise of warmth. But don't expect anything like those polished movie saloons. There are no swinging doors creaking in the breeze, no polished mahogany bar, and definitely no piano man playing jaunty tunes in the background. Most saloons out here are just rough wooden shacks with a few battered stools, a splintered plank for a bar, and the stench of spilled liquor soaking everything. You walk inside, and the air is thick with smoke and the sharp bite of raw alcohol. Forget about sipping a fine glass of whiskey. What you get here is something closer to poison, swill mixed with whatever's on hand. Sometimes that means tobacco juice, a pinch of pepper, or even a dash of turpentine or gunpowder, just to give it some extra fire. One gulp burns all the way down, and if you're unlucky, you might just lose your sight. Folks out here don't drink for pleasure. They drink to forget the dangers waiting outside and the ones they've dragged in with them. It doesn't take long before you notice the real threat: violence. The saloon is never far from trouble. Hollywood would have you believe in fancy duels at high noon, two men squaring off in the middle of the street with the whole town watching. That's a fantasy. Most of the violence here isn't planned or honorable. It's ugly, messy, and comes out of nowhere. Tempers flare when the whiskey hits. Arguments over a spilled drink or an offhand insult can turn deadly in a heartbeat, with gunfire echoing off the walls before anyone has time to blink. As you look around, you'll see nearly everyone's got a gun or a knife tucked somewhere on their person. But here's the truth. Most folks aren't carrying iron to live out some cowboy fantasy. Out here, a weapon is just another tool. You need it for hunting, for keeping wolves and cougars at bay, and sometimes to fend off snakes that slip under the porch at night. You'd be a fool to wander far from town without some kind of protection. Wild animals don't care about your reputation or your quick draw. But don't start thinking this is some lawless gunman's paradise. That's another tall tale. Plenty of frontier towns had strict rules about weapons. If you rode into Dodge City or Tombstone, you'd have to hand over your guns at the edge of town. The famous shootout at the OK Corral. That wasn't about honor. It kicked off because certain folks refused to obey Tombstone's gun ordinance and check their weapons. Real violence on the frontier was rarely about showdowns. More often, it meant being shot in the back during a robbery or caught by surprise in a drunken brawl. The idea of the honorable gunslinger is pure Hollywood invention. Out here, survival matters more than pride, and luck counts for more than skill. You keep walking, boots squelching through the mud, and pass by the doctor's shack. If you get hurt or sick out here, brace yourself. Frontier medicine is the stuff of nightmares. Most doctors have little more than a tattered medical book and a handful of crude tools. Surgery means biting down on a rag while someone saws away at you, maybe with a bottle of whiskey to keep you from screaming. Sterilization is a foreign concept. A simple cut can mean a death sentence. If infection sets in, your best hope is amputation, and you'll be lucky if you don't die from that too. The treatments themselves are just as likely to kill you as the illness. Mercury and arsenic get prescribed for everything from fever to headaches. Bloodletting is still in fashion, and you're as likely to be poisoned by the cure as cured by it. Women in childbirth face terrible odds. Sometimes 1 in 4 don't make it through. Dentistry is just as grim. If a tooth goes bad, it gets yanked out with a pair of pliers and no pain relief. Most folks live with aching jaws and rotten teeth for years before they give in. It's no exaggeration to say that luck plays a bigger role in your survival than any doctor. Even a broken arm can leave you crippled for life. If you manage to survive an injury or illness, you'll probably spend the rest of your days limping or stooped, nursing old wounds that never really heal. Out here, the phrase, "only the strong survive," is more than a saying. It's a daily reality. Your stomach is rumbling again by midday, so you wander over to the local restaurant. Don't expect anything fancy. The restaurant might just be someone's front room where strangers pay a few coins to eat. The food's no better than what you had for breakfast. The meat is tough, gamey, and often smells a bit off. Even after smoking or salting, it can turn your stomach. Vegetables, if you get them, are boiled until they're grey and flavourless. Food poisoning is so common, folks barely complain about it. You just hope the next meal doesn't kill you. While you chew, you catch bits of conversation drifting through the smoky air. People talk about raids, outlaw gangs, and the dangers of traveling alone. You hear about Indian attacks, but the reality is more complicated than the stories back east. The truth is, most violence between settlers and Native Americans is a result of land being stolen and promises broken. Settlers and the military are often the aggressors, but tension and violence bubble up on both sides. The frontier is a powder keg, and you never know what might set it off. Then there are the outlaws, real ones, not the charming rogues from the dime novels. They prey on the weak and the isolated. Lawmen are few and far between, sometimes one sheriff for thousands of square miles. If something goes wrong, you're mostly on your own. Justice is rough and fast. Accused of stealing a horse or some cattle, you might find yourself facing a lynch mob before nightfall. No trial, no chance to clear your name. Out here, the presumption of innocence is a luxury no one can afford. After lunch, you head to the general store, hoping to pick up a few essentials. The prices nearly knock you over. Everything has to be hauled in from hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles away. A single can of peaches can cost you a day's wages, what would be about $20 today. Most folks spend almost everything they've got just to keep enough flour, beans, and salt pork on the shelf. Forget about treats or luxuries. Those are for another world. You notice something else in the store. Silence. Out here, you're cut off from the outside world in ways that are hard to imagine. Mail arrives whenever someone gets around to it, sometimes once a month, sometimes not for half a year. Newspapers are ancient by the time they reach your hands. You might go years without hearing from anyone you left behind back east. Many never see their families again. The loneliness is a weight that never lifts, gnawing at you in the quiet hours. This isolation does something to people. You see it in their eyes, the way they stare into their coffee or nurse their drinks a little longer. Depression, drinking, and suicide are part of the landscape. With nothing but the wind and the sound of your own heartbeat for company, it's easy to lose yourself. You learn to keep your own secrets and watch for signs that your neighbors might be slipping away too. The afternoon sky turns dark and heavy, and the wind picks up with a bite. Out here, weather isn't just inconvenient, it's deadly. There's no warning when a storm rolls in. Blizzards sweep across the plains and swallow travelers whole. Tornadoes flatten whole towns with no warning and no one coming to help. Floods wipe out wagon trains and drown livestock. Droughts leave the land cracked and empty, with nothing but dust on your tongue. Your home offers little shelter. Whether you've got a log cabin, a sod house, or just a wooden shack, you'll feel every gust of wind and every drop of rain. Even inside, you're not safe. In winter, the cold creeps through the walls and settles into your bones. In summer, the heat turns your attic into an oven. Most nights, you lie awake listening to the wind batter at the roof, wondering if it'll hold. No matter how hard you work, nature always has the upper hand. You hurry home as the first fat raindrops start to fall, boots slipping in the mud. On your way, you pass a group of miners heading for the shaft, faces smudged with coal and worry. Mining is a death sentence for many. The ground can collapse without warning. Gas pockets explode. Machinery mangles fingers and limbs. If you survive the day, you'll probably end up coughing blood from breathing in coal dust or poisoned by mercury used in gold processing. Other jobs aren't much safer. Farming means risking your life with every season. Plows break, animals kick and bite, and the elements can undo months of work in an afternoon. Ranching is all muscle and danger, wrestling with cattle that outweigh you 10-1. Loggers face falling trees and saws that don't care about your hands. Out here, every job comes with the risk of maiming or death. You get used to the sight of missing fingers and old scars. You make it back to your cabin just as the storm bursts overhead. The roof leaks, water trickling down the walls and pooling on the floor. You put out buckets to catch it, knowing you'll have to use that water to drink and cook. Clean water is rare. Most folks drink from the same streams their animals use. It's no wonder waterborne diseases sweep through settlements, leaving death in their wake. You pray tonight's rain doesn't bring more sickness. Sitting on your rickety bunk, wet and tired, you listen to the rain hammer the roof and try not to think about how exposed you are. Everything feels fragile. Fire is always a threat. With only candles or oil lamps to push back the darkness, you know one careless moment could set your whole world alight. Most towns burn at least once, and when the flames come, there's no one to call for help. You try to settle in for the night, but your body aches and your mind is racing. The food you ate sits heavy and uncertain in your gut. Every muscle throbs from the day's work. Out here, exhaustion is your constant companion. You can't ever let your guard down. Even asleep, you're half listening for trouble. A loose roof beam, a cough that could mean fever, or the distant howl of a wolf. Lying there in the flickering darkness, you start to realize how little separates you from disaster. There are no heroes here, just regular people fighting to make it through another day. And even if you do everything right, there's no promise you'll see the morning. The Wild West doesn't care about your dreams or your grit. It grinds everyone down, one day at a time. Outside, the wind shrieks and rattles the windows, a constant reminder that you're just a speck in a land that doesn't care if you live or die. As you drift, half awake, you wonder if you'll be one of the lucky ones tomorrow, or if you'll end up as just another name, forgotten in the dust. If you do manage to open your eyes in the morning, you'll find the same gauntlet waiting for you all over again. Out here, every sunrise is a victory, and every day you survive is wrestled from the jaws of a land that's never given anything for free. And that's just making it through a single day, right here in town. But what about when you have to leave the safety of these battered buildings? What happens when you're forced to move on, to face the open prairie and the endless miles ahead? The morning light filters through the cracks in your cabin walls, waking you from a restless sleep. What lies beyond the doorstep is a whole new kind of hardship, and you're about to find out just how little the West cares about your plans. You wake up stiff and sore, every muscle reminding you that sleep out here is just a temporary truce with discomfort. There's no time to stretch and savor the morning, though. Out here, if you linger, you lose, whether it's to hunger, weather, or just the endless demands of survival. You throw off the blanket, bones popping, and wonder what fresh misery today has cooked up for you. So, let's imagine you decide you've had enough of this little patch of dirt and want to see what lies beyond the edge of town. Maybe you're aiming for a new settlement, itching to join a wagon train, or just reckless enough to roam. Whatever your reason, let me set you straight. Travel in the 1870s isn't anything like the adventure stories you've heard. Forget winding, sunlit roads and carefree gallops. Out here, travel is a gauntlet, and the land doesn't care if you make it. Sure, by this time, the transcontinental railroad stretches from ocean to ocean, a marvel of iron and ambition. But don't get too excited, unless you've got a fat wallet or you're lucky enough to be traveling between the big cities. That iron horse isn't for the likes of you. Most folks, especially out here, move by horse, wagon, or on their own two blistered feet. If you actually own a horse, count yourself among the lucky few. Horses are the Cadillacs of the West, and they cost about as much, in your terms. A solid, healthy horse might set you back several months of wages, a fortune for a struggling settler. And that's before you even think about the extras, saddles, bridles, oats, and the occasional blacksmith or farrier. Out here, veterinary care is often a loaded pistol and a hard goodbye if your animal breaks a leg or comes up lame with something you can't fix. Nobody gets sentimental about it for long. You can't afford to. Now, if you're picturing a gentle rocking ride under the open sky, think again. Saddles in the 1870s aren't made for comfort. They're made to keep you on the beast, nothing more. After a day in the saddle, even seasoned cowhands walk bow-legged, raw and aching in places you didn't know could hurt. Sometimes your horse will spook at a rattler, a sudden gust, or nothing at all. You could be thrown in a heartbeat, And if you break something out here, you better hope your luck holds, because help is miles away and no one's coming fast. Maybe you couldn't scrape up enough for a horse, so you throw in with a wagon. Let me tell you, wagons are the stuff of legend, mostly the wrong kind. Forget the Hollywood image of families singing as they bounce along the prairie. The ride is brutal. There's no suspension, just stiff wooden wheels grinding over every rut and stone, jarring your bones until your teeth rattle. The constant shaking churns your stomach, and wagon sickness is as real as any seasickness, leaves you green and wishing you'd stayed home. Most roads are just the memory of a trail, worn into the earth by the misery of those who came before you. After a rain, those tracks turn into thick mud that'll swallow your wheels to the axle. When it's dry, dust billows up so thick you can barely see your own hands, let alone the wagon in front of you. You'll be coughing up grit for days. And wagons break down, as a matter of course. Wheels crack, axles snap, and you're left cursing in the middle of nowhere, with nothing for miles but the sound of your own frustration. Now, let's say you've got real ambition or desperation. You join a wagon train bound for California or Oregon, chasing dreams of land and gold. The Oregon Trail, 2,000 miles of hope and heartbreak, waits for you. Between the 1840s and 1860s, about 400,000 people tried their luck on that trail. 1 in 10 never made it. They called it the nation's longest graveyard for a reason. Some historians figure that for every mile, you'd pass 10 to 15 graves. That's a grave every 350 feet, stretching as far as the eye could see, makeshift crosses and stone piles, most without a name, just a memory left behind, as families had no choice but to keep moving. Disease is the real killer on the trail. Cholera, an invisible enemy that rides the water supply, strikes with a vengeance. 1 minute, you're breaking camp. By sundown, someone's digging a shallow grave. Cholera hits fast, violent sickness, unstoppable diarrhea, and vomiting so severe it can drain the life right out of you before anyone can even say goodbye. No medicine anyone trusted, no cure, just luck and clean water if you could find it. With one bad outbreak, a wagon train could lose a dozen souls in a week. And it's not just cholera. There's dysentery, typhoid, mountain fever, all waiting to pounce when you're weakest. Children seem to suffer the most. Families bury sons and daughters and have to keep walking. The grief swallowed because if you stop, you miss your chance to cross the mountains before the snow closes in and makes the route a death trap. Medicine on the trail is primitive and desperate, herbs, prayers, and superstitions. Sometimes the cure does more harm than the disease. You're far more likely to die from a remedy than from a bullet, despite what the dime novels say. Crossing rivers? That's a whole different gamble. Wagons aren't boats, but you have to cross dozens of rivers anyway. Sometimes there's a ferry, sometimes a shallow ford, but more often you have to float the whole wagon and hope it doesn't tip or split apart. The rivers out west, like the Platte, the Columbia, and the Snake, are cold and swift, and they've swallowed hundreds, both people and animals. Supplies, precious food, and sometimes your entire family can vanish in an instant. If you survive, you're wet, cold, and possibly stranded, with less than you started. Now, let's address one of the biggest myths you've heard, that the deadliest threat out here is an arrow from behind a sagebrush. Truth is, attacks by native tribes were rare on the trail. In fact, a lot of tribes ended up helping migrants, offering food, fresh water, and advice on the safest river crossings. Most of the violence and death came from your own side. Wagon accidents, drownings, livestock kicking out in panic, or careless hands fumbling a loaded rifle. Guns are everywhere, but most folks don't know how to use them safely. Accidents are common. Shooting yourself or a neighbor is easier than picking off a bandit. And don't forget the psychological toll. Every day you pass fresh graves, sometimes your own kin. There's no time to mourn. The clock is always ticking, the threat of early snow or dwindling supplies hanging over your head. Some folks break under the weight. Stories of suicides on the trail aren't just rumors, they're the ugly truth, whispered around campfires after dark. If you're one of the few who actually make it to your destination, staggering into California or Oregon, you'll probably arrive, broke, hungry, and worn down to the bone. Whatever dreams you carried are battered and bruised, and what you find at the end is just another set of challenges. Land is hard, towns are rough, and the welcome isn't always warm. You might have survived the journey, but the West isn't done testing you yet. But maybe you don't have the stomach for 2,000 miles of misery. Maybe you're just heading to the next town over, thinking a short trip can't be that bad. Well, the Wild West has other plans. Even a day's ride can turn dangerous fast. Outlaws prowl the lonely trails, looking for easy pickings. Forget the Hollywood image where every stagecoach gets held up at gunpoint. But robberies do happen often enough to keep you on edge. Mother Nature is the real outlaw out here. Flash floods can turn a dry creek into a death trap in minutes. The sun bakes the desert until even the air burns your throat. Dehydration and heat stroke can finish you before you know it. In winter, blizzards roll in without warning, trapping travelers and freezing them where they stand. And if you've heard of the Donner Party, you know that hunger can drive people to the edge of madness when there's no food and no hope of rescue. Navigation? Good luck. Detailed maps are a luxury, and most folks rely on rumors, half-remembered directions, or distant landmarks that change with the seasons. If you get lost, and plenty do, you may not get another chance to find your way back, especially if your food and water run out. So, before you saddle up or hitch your wagon, think about this. Out here, the land is indifferent, the dangers are real, and survival is never promised. The adventure isn't in the scenery, it's in simply making it through another day. And as you press on, shaking the dust from your boots and squinting against the sun, something else catches your eye. A glimpse of the true face of the frontier, far different from what you've seen in the movies. Let me tell you something you probably haven't heard from the dime novels or the moving pictures. As you make your way down these rutted wagon tracks, the biggest surprise isn't how empty the West feels, but just how many different kinds of people you bump into out here. Forget the idea that it's all white hats and six-shooters. The real West is a crossroads, a wild stew of languages, faces, and stories from every corner of the earth. You see Chinese laborers bent over rail ties, faces lined with dust and exhaustion, working side by side with Irishmen, Swedes, and whoever else could wrestle a spike into place. The Chinese came by the thousands, building the iron roads, swinging pickaxes through mountain and desert from dawn until their backs screamed. They opened laundries and shops in the towns that sprouted up along the tracks, but never got treated like neighbors. Most folks saw them as tools, cheap, disposable labor for the dirtiest jobs. The pay was lower, the danger higher, and if a tunnel collapsed, no one came running. Keep walking, and you'll pass adobe villages that have stood here since before any American dreamed of a frontier. Mexican families tend their orchards and herds, speaking Spanish in the markets, their roots sunk deep. They were here before the border changed, but that didn't spare them. After the war, slick-talking land speculators and greedy newcomers used crooked laws to seize ranches that had stayed in the same family for generations. The old Don never stood a chance against forged titles and a judge in someone else's pocket. Maybe you picture a cowboy as a white man with a southern drawl. Well, that's a Hollywood trick. Out on the range, you'd be surprised how many black cowboy hats ride with the herd. Some say 1 out of every 4 cowboys was black, many of them freedmen or sons of freedmen, looking to carve out a life where nobody knew or cared about their past. They broke wild horses, drove cattle up the Chisholm Trail, and slept under the same stars as any other hand. Yet when the work was done, most towns kept their doors shut tight to them. The freedom of the frontier didn't mean you could buy land, sit at the bar, or get a fair deal at the bank. Then there are the new arrivals from across the Atlantic. Germans, Irish, Italians, Norwegians, whole families packed into creaking wagons, hauling their language, food, and customs along with their hopes. You hear their songs on the wind, see their churches and beer halls going up wherever a handful of countrymen gather. These enclaves provide comfort, but also keep folks apart. Suspicion runs high, and neighbors don't always welcome outsiders. Conflict bubbles under the surface, ready to erupt over a fence line, a dance hall, or a single careless word. But none of these groups shaped the land as deeply as the native nations who've called it home since before anyone could remember. The truth is, when you walk this ground, you're treading over ancient trails and sacred places, the inheritance of people who watched the newcomers pour in by the wagon load. Once there were millions, powerful nations with their own laws, languages, and ways of life. By the end of the century, disease and violence had left only a few 100,000. The buffalo, once so thick a herd could block the sun, was slaughtered almost to extinction, not just for hides, but to starve the people who depended on them. The government's answer was to shove survivors onto reservations, tiny barren scraps of land with poor soil and little water. Promises made in treaties were broken as soon as gold or silver was discovered nearby. Imagine losing your home over and over, each time told it was for your own good. Then, to rub salt in the wound, the government snatched native children from their parents, sent them to far-off boarding schools, and tried to scrub every last trace of their culture from them. Kill the Indian, save the man, became the motto. But what it really did was break families and spirits for generations. Movies love to show endless battles, cowboys and Indians locked in mortal combat. That's a fairy tale. Most native nations tried for years to coexist, trading or adapting to the flood of newcomers. Violence usually flared only after treaty was broken, when patience finally snapped under the weight of betrayal. But the surprises don't end there. You might expect frontier women to be helpless, fluttering around in petticoats, waiting to be rescued. That's another myth best left to the storytellers. Here, women do backbreaking work from the first hint of dawn until long after the last candle burns out. They cook, mend, and care for young ones, sure, but they also plow the fields, haul water, and mend fences. A woman might have to defend her home with a shotgun one day and deliver a neighbor's baby the next. And when a husband died, maybe from a fall, a fever, or a stray bullet, she took over the whole farm or business herself, kids in tow, and no one to lean on. For all their sweat and sacrifice, women found themselves with almost no legal rights. If you're married, your property belongs to your husband. If he decides to leave, you don't get to keep the house or even your own children. The courts don't care. Divorce is rare, and if a man raises his hand, the law calls it a private matter. For unmarried women, the options are slim. Teaching school is one of the few respectable jobs, but don't expect a living wage. The minute you marry, you're out of work. Some women run boarding houses, sew dresses, or work as nurses just to scrape by. Then there's the group everyone whispers about, the soiled doves, the women working the saloons and brothels. Forget the painted-over romance. Most ended up there because they were desperate, widowed, abandoned, or with nowhere else to turn. The work is dangerous, the money uncertain, and the risks, disease, violence, addiction, are everywhere, even if you manage to save a little. Polite society slams the door in your face. There's no easy path out. Still, the West sometimes offers more freedom than back east if you know where to look. There aren't enough women to go around, so those who come west have their pick of suitors. Some towns even give women the vote, decades before the rest of the country gets the idea. Wyoming and Utah lead the way, not out of pure generosity, but because they know their communities can't survive without the hard work and backbone that women bring. Now, let's talk about keeping order in this wild land. Hollywood loves a heroic sheriff, all starch and iron, cleaning up a town with a single gunfight. Truth is, law enforcement is patchy and thin as watered soup. Big towns might have a sheriff and a couple of deputies, but out in the backcountry, you're lucky if anyone comes when trouble finds you. One sheriff might be responsible for thousands of square miles, and he can't be everywhere at once. When things go sideways, he rounds up whoever's handy, hands out tin stars, and prays they can find the right outlaw before someone else gets hurt. Inside town limits, marshals try to keep the peace. Sometimes honest men, sometimes bullies with a badge, sometimes both. Pay is lousy, the work is dangerous, and the line between upholding the law and making your own profit is blurry. Some of the most famous lawmen, like Wyatt Earp, made their names as much in gambling halls and brothels as in jailhouses. Federal marshals roam the territories chasing big fish, counterfeiters, train robbers, men who cross state lines with their crimes. But there are never enough of them, and their reach only goes so far. In the end, most justice is local and rough. If the law can't or won't act, the people take matters into their own hands. Vigilante groups spring up overnight, sometimes keeping order, sometimes unleashing chaos. It doesn't take much for a mob to turn ugly. One rumor, one accusation, and someone swings from a tree with no trial. The quick-draw duel in the street? That's mostly fantasy. Most deaths come from bar fights, drunken arguments, or simmering feuds over land and cattle. Justice is swift, often brutal, and not at all fair by any modern measure. Hangings are common, not just for murder, but for stealing a horse or a cow. Prisons exist, but you'd rather take your chances in the open. Disease and violence kill more inmates than the hangman's noose. As daylight fades and the wind starts to pick up, your thoughts turn to where you'll sleep tonight. If you're near a town, maybe you'll find a hotel or a boarding house. Don't get your hopes up. A good hotel means a sagging bed, probably crawling with bedbugs, a rickety washstand, and maybe a chair if you're lucky. Bathrooms are out back, shared by every guest, and the walls are so thin you'll hear every groan, cough, and whispered secret from your neighbors. On busy nights, you might have to share a bed with a total stranger. Sheets get changed when the mood strikes, and that might be after a dozen guests. Light comes from smoky lamps or flickering candles, and everything, absolutely everything, stinks of sweat and stale tobacco. The price of a night's rest. Anywhere from a quarter to a whole dollar. A fortune when you're scraping by. No wonder plenty of folks stretch out in barns, stables, or just roll up in a blanket under the stars. It's cheaper, but don't think it's safer. You're exposed to the weather, wild animals, and anything else that prowls the night. If you're out in the open, camping isn't as easy as they make it look. You need to find dry wood, build a fire that won't burn down the prairie, and cook a meal that won't poison you or leave you gnawing on raw beans. Make the fire too big, and you might wake up to the crackle of grass burning all around you. Make it too small, and you shiver through the night, teeth chattering, wondering if you'll make it until morning. Even experienced scouts and native travelers can get it wrong. For most newcomers, camping is a recipe for disaster. Burnt hands, spoiled food, and a night spent wide awake, jumping at every sound. As the last light bleeds from the sky, the frontier comes alive with things that don't care about your comfort. Coyotes yip and howl at the moon. Somewhere out there, a mountain lion slides silently through the brush. The wind rattles the leaves, and every unfamiliar sound keeps your nerves stretched tight. For city folk used to street lamps and neighbors close by, the darkness feels absolute, pressing in from every side. You hear stories, sometimes true, about wolves sniffing around camps, snakes curling up in the warmth of your bedroll, or worse, a stranger creeping in from the shadows. Native raids are rare, but when they come, they hit at dawn, when you're groggy and exposed. Most nights, nothing happens, but you don't sleep easy. The real enemy is your own mind, spinning out every possible threat in the dark. Diaries from the time are filled with tales of sleepless nights, not just from cold or hard ground, but from the constant worry that something might be out there, watching and waiting. The truth is, the relentless strain takes a toll. Out here, you're not just fighting hunger, thirst, and the elements. You're fighting your own fear, every single night. Modern comforts, locks, alarms, a neighbor's porch light don't exist. Vulnerability is your constant companion. Most folks would crack after a few nights of this, never mind the lifetime. As you drift toward uneasy sleep, it hits you how little the West resembles the stories. Every mile is a test, every day a grind. The land doesn't care if you're tough, clever, or lucky. Most won't make it. A missed turn, a careless fire, a bad encounter on the trail. That's all it takes to become another forgotten name, another grave beside the road. So as darkness settles and the night sounds rise, remember, out here, survival isn't guaranteed. The West forgives no weakness, and every dawn is a victory. If you make it through the night, you'll face a new set of trials, harder, dirtier, and even less forgiving than the last. And that's exactly where we'll pick up next. The new day dawns on the frontier, and you've somehow survived the night. But before you get too proud, you'd better brace yourself. Mining, ranching, and farming are waiting, and they don't care how tired you are. Out here, just making it through the night is its own kind of victory. But as the first light spreads across the raw bones of the frontier, you realize the real work is just beginning. Your back aches from a night spent on a straw tick, every muscle stiff and sore. But there's no time to wallow. You roll out of bed, boots hitting the dirt floor, and you start thinking about which devil you want to wrestle today. Maybe you're itching to chase the kind of fortune you've heard about in the smoky corners of saloons and the wild tales passed around campfires. Gold, silver, copper, the kind of riches that supposedly wait for any fool with a pickaxe and enough grit. The stories make it sound simple. Some lucky soul stumbles onto a nugget the size of his fist, and just like that, he's rich. But if you're smart, you ought to know that's just the surface of the story. The truth is a hell of a lot rougher. Let's say you're set on mining. You picture yourself as the next big prospector, pockets heavy with gold dust. Well, first you've got to stake a claim. Sounds easy enough, but by the 1870s, every spot worth a damn has already been snapped up by men who got here before you. You'll spend days, maybe weeks, scouring hillsides and riverbeds, hoping to find a patch of ground that isn't already spoken for. If you do stumble on a likely spot, we're not done yet. You'll have to trudge into the nearest government office, might be 20 miles or more, stand in line, pay a fat fee, and hope nobody tries to jump your claim before you get it all squared away. And after all that, the real work begins. You want grueling? Try standing waist deep in a mountain stream from sunup to sundown, water so cold it burns your bones, your fingers red and swollen as you sift gravel through a battered pan. Your hands crack and bleed, the skin peeling away where the icy water chews at you. Your back knots up from bending over for hours, and your eyes play tricks on you as you search for the glint of gold buried in river mud. Most days, you come away with nothing but a few flakes, barely enough to buy a stale biscuit or a slug of whiskey. The stories of easy gold leave out the fact that most of what you'll find is disappointment. And if you're fool enough to try your luck in hard rock mining, you're stepping straight into the jaws of danger. Picture yourself hacking away at a tunnel in the belly of a mountain, the walls groaning and shifting above your head. There's no engineer to tell you if it's safe. Every swing of your pick could be the one that brings the ceiling down. You breathe in air thick with dust and the stench of blasting powder. If the rock doesn't crush you, the air might. Carbon monoxide creeps in, silent, invisible, deadly. You can't smell it, you just get dizzy. Then you go down and never get up again. Blasting's its own beast. Black powder and dynamite don't care if you're careful or not. Charges go off too soon, shrapnel flies, and men lose hands, eyes, sometimes their lives. The thunder of explosions pounds your ears until you're half deaf, a constant ringing that never leaves. Even if you make it out of the shaft alive, the real killer is slow. You spend years breathing in fine rock dust, your lungs turning to stone from the inside out until every breath feels like drowning. Mercury and lead seep in too, poisoning your mind and body. You watch your friends' hands shake, their words slur, and you know it's only a matter of time before it's your turn. The mine owners don't lose any sleep over it. There's no safety inspector, no one to check on your well-being. You're just another body swinging a pick. If you get hurt, you're on your own. A busted leg or a lost hand means your mining days are over, and there's nobody waiting with a handout. You get tossed aside, forgotten, left to beg or starve. You'd think for all this misery, you'd at least get paid well. But the truth is, most miners scrape by on barely enough to feed themselves. The real money goes to the saloon owners, the storekeepers, and the brothel madams. Those are the folks who actually strike it rich off your sweat and dreams. Take a look around a mining town, and you'll see what I mean. It's all rough edges and raw nerves. Mostly young men, hard and reckless, packed together with nothing to burn off the pressure but cheap whiskey and games of chance. There's a fight or a stabbing nearly every night. Gunshots echo down muddy streets, and every morning brings a new body in the gutter. Sanitation? That's a joke. Raw sewage pools in the alleys. Garbage piles up, and the flies swarm thick enough to black out the sun. Typhoid, cholera, and dysentery ride through town like outlaws, picking off the careless and the unlucky. When summer heats up, the reek is something you'll never forget. Say you do manage to dig up some gold or silver. Think you can just stroll into a bank and cash out? Banks out here are a gamble themselves. Some towns don't even have one. You end up carrying your gold dust in a pouch, always looking over your shoulder for highwaymen. If you try to sell to a saloon or a general store, they'll give you pennies on the dollar. And if you find a bank, you better hope they're not one of the fly-by-night outfits that vanish with your savings in the middle of the night. Paper money's not much better. Every bank prints its own bills, and half of them are worthless or fakes. Gold and silver coins are safest, but carrying them makes you a target for every thief in the territory. Maybe, after a few weeks of this, you start eyeing the open range. Ranching sounds like a better bet, doesn't it? You picture yourself astride a horse, driving cattle across the prairie, living free under the endless sky. The cattle industry's booming, and the railroads are hungry for beef. But don't let those daydreams fool you. Ranching's a hard, unforgiving life with its own set of traps. First off, starting a ranch takes money, and plenty of it. Land, cattle, fencing, supplies. The costs stack up fast. Most would. The ranchers go deep into debt before they even herd their first calf. And out here, luck can turn on you in a heartbeat. Drought isn't just inconvenient, it's ruin. You watch the grass wither, water holes dry up, and your cattle drop dead by the dozen. Then, just when you think you've survived the worst, winter comes howling in. The blizzards of 86 and 87 killed so many cattle that whole fortunes disappeared overnight. Ranchers watched helpless while their herds froze to death or starved in the snow, and there wasn't a thing they could do. Disease is always lurking too. Texas fever, anthrax, when these sweep through, you can lose everything in a week. There's no vaccine, no treatment. Predators like wolves and mountain lions pick off the weak and the newborns, and you're out there every night, rifle in hand, hoping you can save just one more calf. Sometimes it's not even the big things that get you. Poisonous plants, a patch of quicksand, a broken leg on rocky ground, anyone can spell disaster for your herd. And then there's the cattle drives. Hollywood makes them look like grand adventures, but let me set you straight. You're in the saddle before dawn, trailing a restless herd hundreds of miles to the nearest railhead. You barely sleep, grabbing a few minutes' rest while your horse plods along in the dark. The trail's a gauntlet of hazards, raging rivers, sudden storms, and the ever-present threat of stampede. All it takes is a clap of thunder or a snapped branch, and suddenly thousands of terrified cattle are charging blind, flattening everything in their path. Cowboys caught in the stampede don't get a second chance. Life on the trail isn't the freewheeling adventure you've been sold. Most cowboys are just boys, barely out of their teens, working for a few dollars a month and all the beans they can choke down. Their diet's monotonous: beans, salt pork, stale biscuit, and if you're lucky, a chunk of tough beef. Medical care is whatever the cook remembers from his mother's kitchen. You break a bone or get caught on a horn, you'd better hope you can gut it out. Most cowboys don't last long. Between the accidents, the violence, and the endless exposure, plenty die before they see 30. You might think, after all that farming would be a safer bet. The Homestead Act promises you 160 acres, free if you can stick it out for 5 years. It sounds like a dream. Your own land, your own crops, a fresh start. But let me tell you, that dream comes with a price. Out here on the plains, 60 acres isn't always enough to keep your family fed, especially when the rain forgets to fall. The old farming methods from back east won't cut it. Most newcomers have no idea how to coax a crop out of dry, stubborn soil. Your first job is building a home, and unless you've got money for lumber, that means a sod house. You spend weeks cutting heavy blocks of grass and earth, stacking them into thick, low walls. When the wind howls, the dirt crumbles. When it rains, water seeps through the roof. The place is dark, damp, and alive with bugs and snakes. Every morning you wake up and patch the holes, hoping the walls will hold for one more day. Breaking the prairie for planting is back-breaking work. The sod is tough as iron, laced with roots built up over centuries. Your plow catches and jerks, and every step is a struggle. It can take a whole season just to clear enough land to plant a small crop. The labor wears on you, leaving your hands raw and your shoulders permanently hunched. Many farmers never recover from the toll it takes on their bodies. Plant your seeds, and you're not out of the woods. Drought, floods, early frosts, they're all waiting to ruin your hard work. Sometimes, just when you think you've made it, grasshoppers descend in clouds thick enough to block out the sky. They eat everything green, then turn on your tools and even your laundry. There's no stopping them. One bad swarm, and you're left with nothing. Illness is another constant threat. There's no one to help if you or your family fall sick during planting or harvest. If you're laid up, the work doesn't wait, and falling behind can mean the difference between eating and starving. Women work just as hard as men, sometimes laboring in the fields right up to the day they give birth, then back at it days later because there's simply no one else to do the job. Accidents are part of life. Tools break and cut you, animals panic and trample, whoever's closest, and even harvest time has its dangers. More than a few farmers have been smothered in their own grain bins or crushed under the weight of collapsing storage sheds. There's no doctor within miles, and if you're hurt, you make do or you don't make it at all. The mental toll is just as real. Your nearest neighbor might be 10 miles away, and months can pass without any company but your own family. The silence on the prairie is heavy and endless. Some folks call it prairie madness. Women especially suffer from the loneliness, sometimes going weeks without another soul to talk to. Depression and anxiety take root, and more than a few settlers wander off, leaving behind their hard-won acres. And let's say, by some miracle, you manage to raise a decent crop. Now, you've got to get it to market. That means hauling it miles over rough trails, hoping it doesn't spoil before you can sell. The railroads and big companies set the prices, and they're not interested in making things easy for you. They keep the cost of shipping high and the price of crops low, squeezing every last penny out of the small farmer. You're caught between drought, disaster, and the cold calculations of men you'll never meet. So maybe you're starting to see the pattern here. Mining, ranching, farming, every path has its own set of sharp edges. The movies might show the West as a land of endless opportunity, but the real story is one of sweat, blood, and heartbreak. Out here, the land chews up the weak and the unlucky, and the odds are rarely in your favor. You probably wouldn't last a week, let alone a season, but as tough as these old ways are, by the 1870s, life on the frontier is starting to shift. The railroad's pushing further west, new towns are springing up, and a different kind of work is beginning to appear. Maybe, just maybe, you're thinking there's another way to get by out here, a way that doesn't involve risking your neck in a mine shaft or breaking your back behind a plow. Because by the 1870s, another option was emerging on the frontier, earning wages in the bustling new towns and industries. By the time you arrive out here, taking a job in one of these raw, fast-growing towns might seem like a way to dodge the worst dangers of mining, ranching, or farming. Maybe you picture steady pay, a roof over your head, and a little less risk. Well, let me set you straight. Wage labor might spare you some disasters, but it brings a fresh set of hardships, and none of them are gentle. Forget everything you know about modern safety. Industrial rules and regulations? Not even a rumor. You step into a factory, a sawmill, or a railroad camp, and you're gambling with your fingers, your limbs, and your life every single day. Machines roar and spin without guards or warnings. One slip, one distracted moment, and you're likely to lose a hand or an eye. Nobody's going to check if you're all right. They'll just haul you off, mop up the blood, and keep the shift rolling. Now, if you've got the nerve to work construction, brace yourself. The buildings are growing taller, but harnesses and safety lines are as rare as rain in July. Men climb beams and scaffolding, trusting their balance and luck. Sundays, you'll see someone tumble from a rooftop, just vanish from the world in a heartbeat. The rest of you keep hammering, boots planted in sawdust and fear, because there's always another man waiting for your spot. And then there's railroad work, the job that's supposed to build the future but chews up the present. Laying track out here is a grind of sweat, heat, and back-breaking labor, with barely enough tools for the crews. The sun bakes you, dust chokes your lungs, and the work never lets up. You swing heavy sledgehammers, drag rails across uneven ground, and pray you don't pass out from exhaustion. Accidents are common, sometimes deadly, especially when dynamite is involved. If you're Chinese, like many of the men who built these rails, you're handed the worst jobs, handling unstable explosives, tunneling through rock, and hauling debris where nobody else will go. The pay is lower, the hours longer, and the dangers multiplied. Don't think for a second you'll get rich doing this. Most workers pull 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, sometimes more. Wages barely cover your food and board, and if you get sick or hurt, you're on your own. Children as young as 8 or 9 are right there beside you. Their small hands nimble but vulnerable, their bodies more likely to get caught in gears or crushed by falling lumber. Nobody blinks at this. It's just how the world works out here. You have no rights, no protections. If your boss feels like it, he can fire you on the spot, slash your pay, or refuse to hand over your wages. Complain and you'll find yourself blacklisted, labeled a troublemaker, shut out by every other employer in town. Try to stand up for yourself or your fellow workers, and you'll soon discover how quickly a community can turn its back. In some places, especially the mining or lumber regions, you'll find yourself in a company town. The company owns your shack, the store where you buy your meager supplies, and sometimes even the church. They pay you in script, paper that only works at their own store, where the prices are always higher than anywhere else. You work, you buy, you owe more than you earn, and you can never save enough to buy your way out. It's a cage with invisible bars. But maybe you're not a wage worker. Maybe you're holding on to a little patch of land, or riding herd for a rancher, or digging for gold in the hills. Doesn't matter. The frontier shapes every part of your life in ways that would leave most modern folks dizzy and lost. The first thing that strikes you is time. Forget clocks, schedules, and alarms. Out here, time flows like water, changing with the seasons and the slow wheel of the sun. There's no electric light to chase away the dark. You rise with the dawn, your body aching from yesterday's toil, and you're ready for sleep soon after the sun sinks. The length of your workday stretches and contracts with the season, longer in summer, shorter in winter. Nobody's counting hours. The only thing that matters is the job, the acres plowed, the cattle driven, the ore hauled up from the earth. When it's time to harvest or drive the herd, you'll work from first light until the moon is high, day after day, with barely a pause for a meal or a drink of water. Winter changes everything. When the ground freezes and the herds are penned, life slows down. Men mend harnesses and sharpen tools. Women sew and patch and prepare for the next rush of work. There are days when you barely leave the warmth of your fire, grateful for a little rest, and always wary of the next hard season. The idea of punctuality is almost laughable. Few people own watches. and most don't see the need. Morning or after supper is as precise as it gets, unless you're catching a stagecoach or, later on, a train, one of the few places where schedules actually matter. Otherwise, everyone moves at the pace of horses and daylight. When the day's work is finally done, you won't find anyone binge-watching dramas or scrolling through a phone. Entertainment is simple, if it exists at all. Most nights, people just sit by the fire, trading stories, sharing local gossip, or playing a hand of cards. If someone's got a fiddle, a harmonica, or a battered guitar, you might get a tune or two. Sometimes, the whole settlement will gather for a dance, stomp the dust, and forget their troubles for a few hours. Books are precious and rare. If you're lucky enough to have one, you'll read it aloud to your family or neighbors until the pages are nearly worn through. A single newspaper, when it arrives, gets passed from hand to hand. Read until every advertisement and obituary is memorized. Sports and games are stripped down to the basics. Baseball is catching on, but you play it with a batted ball and whatever stick you can find. Racing horses, wrestling in the dirt, or shooting at tin cans. These are your chances to prove yourself, to break up the monotony, and maybe earn a little respect. Kids invent their own fun with nothing but energy and imagination. Tag, hide and seek, or stickball played in the street. Every holiday feels like a miracle. The 4th of July draws folks from miles around. Picnics, speeches, races, and a dance that might last till sunrise. Harvest festivals are a rare reward after a season's back-breaking labor. Christmas, Easter, and other religious days bring people together for worship, feasting, and a brief escape from routine. These gatherings are the glue that holds a community together, even as hardship threatens to pull it apart. Now, as darkness descends and the world grows quiet, you settle into the hush of a true frontier night. There's a heaviness to it, a silence so deep you can hear your own breath, your heartbeat echoing in the emptiness. No cars, no buzzing lights, no distant engines, just the whisper of wind through the grass, the lonely call of a coyote, and the soft chorus of night insects. For some, this stillness is a comfort, a rare peace after the day's chaos. For others, it's a reminder of how alone you really are out here, how easily the world could forget you. You start to realize just how much grit it takes to survive, not just the muscle and sweat, but the stubbornness, the skill, the ability to keep moving when everything feels hopeless. The men and women who made it out here weren't legends. They were stubborn, clever, desperate, and sometimes just plain lucky. No one handed them a script or a hero's badge. They faced every day with the tools and knowledge they had, and somehow they endured. The night settles heavy around you, the air crisp and cool. Above, the stars blaze in a way you've never seen before, an endless river of light across a sky untouched by city glow. The Milky Way stretches from horizon to horizon, a silent reminder that even in this hard, unforgiving land, there's beauty worth noticing. Maybe, in this moment of quiet, you wonder if you could have lasted. Could you have survived not just the work, but the loneliness, the hunger, the endless grind? Most people today like to imagine themselves as frontier survivors, but the truth is, most of us wouldn't last a week. As you close your eyes, The sounds of the frontier night wrap around you, reminding you of everything you've endured and everything you still have to face. But come morning, the struggle starts all over again. And speaking of morning, that's where we're headed next. Because when the sun rises on the Wild West, hunger is waiting. And out here, what you eat, how you feed your children, and how you scrape together a meal could be the difference between life and death. You wake up hungry, again. Out here on the frontier, that gnawing emptiness in your belly never really leaves, not for long anyway. You might be picturing a hearty breakfast, a stack of golden pancakes dripping with syrup, or crisp bacon sizzling in a pan. Forget it. Food in the Wild West isn't about comfort or variety. It's about survival, pure and simple. By the 1870s, the West is a patchwork of hope, desperation, and hard lessons. And one of the first lessons you'll learn is that keeping yourself fed is a daily struggle. Game is out there, some days anyway. If you know how to track and shoot, you might land a rabbit, flush a grouse, or, if luck's on your side, take down a deer. But hunting isn't a simple stroll in the woods with a shiny rifle. Ammunition is precious, and every bullet you spend on a rabbit is one less you have in case a mountain lion or a desperate stranger crosses your path. Time spent hunting is time not spent repairing fences, tending crops, or hauling water. Most families don't have the luxury to hunt every day, even if the land is thick with wildlife. So you settle for what you can grow, trade, or buy in bulk. The backbone of a frontier meal is beans, corn, and pork. Heavy on the beans and corn if you're unlucky. Day in, day out, you eat the same things in endless combinations. Sometimes you choke down a slab of salted pork so tough you need good teeth and stronger jaws. Fresh vegetables and fruit are rare treasures, only showing up in their short season. And when the cold months roll in, your diet shrinks down to whatever you manage to store away. That lack of variety isn't just dull, it's dangerous. Go a few weeks without anything green or fresh, and you start to notice your gums bleed when you brush your teeth, if you even have a toothbrush. The pain in your joints, the teeth that start to loosen, those are the first signs of scurvy. A slow-motion disaster that creeps up on anyone who spends a winter out here without proper food. You might have heard stories of sailors suffering at sea, but here on the prairie, landlocked and surrounded by empty fields, you're just as vulnerable. Children stop growing right, adults get weaker, and sometimes you don't make it to spring. Preserving food is more than a household chore. It's a full-time job, and your life literally depends on getting it right. No refrigerators out here, so you have to get creative. Meat gets smoked over slow-burning fires, salted until it's almost inedible, or cut into strips and dried in the sun until it's leathery and tough. These methods keep the worst bacteria at bay. But the taste, let's just say, you'll never crave jerky again after a winter of chewing on it. All that salt isn't doing your body any favors. High blood pressure is just another risk you accept because the alternative is starvation. Women, and sometimes children, spend long hot weeks in late summer boiling jars, pickling vegetables in vinegar, fermenting what they can, and drying fruit when the harvest is good. Root vegetables get buried in cellars dug deep enough to stay cool, but not so damp that everything rots. You plan and hope, but if you misjudge by even a little bit, you might run out before the first shoots of spring. That's the difference between a hard winter and a deadly one. And here's something most folks today can't stomach. Pests are part of the deal. No matter how careful you are, rats, mice, and insects find your stores. They gnaw holes in your sacks of beans, leave droppings in your flour, and sometimes you spot a few legs or wings mixed into your morning mush. Out here, you just accept it. You sift when you can, pick out the worst of it, and eat the rest. A little extra crunch in your bread? Better than going hungry. Cooking isn't a quick task either. Forget gas or electric stoves. You work over an open hearth, sweating as you feed sticks into the fire. Or, if you're really out in the open country, you gather buffalo chips or dried grass to burn. It takes hours just to boil a pot of beans, and someone, usually a child, has to fetch all the water you need from a well or distant creek. Even the simplest meal is a production, and by the time you're done, you're more exhausted than hungry. Spices and sugar are rare luxuries. Maybe you get a little cinnamon at Christmas, or a pinch of black pepper if you're feeling rich. Coffee is a treasure, hoarded for special mornings, or when a neighbor drops by. Most days, your drink is water or wheat tea, and milk is only an option if you have a cow that's producing. That's never a sure thing, since cows can dry up or fall sick without warning. For children, the food situation is even worse. They eat what you eat, and often less of it. Their diets are so plain and repetitive that most modern nutritionists would be horrified. But on the upside, you don't see much obesity on the frontier. Our childhood here is lean, not because it's healthy, but because food is scarce and labor is constant. Most kids are stick-thin, their bones showing through skin stretched tight from work and worry. You might think kids on the frontier had a carefree life, running wild and free like in the movies. That's nonsense. Childhood out here is short and hard. By the age of 6 or 7, children are already doing their share, gathering eggs, feeding chickens, keeping an eye on their younger siblings, or hauling firewood. These aren't chores handed out for pocket money, but real work. If a child slacks off, the whole family suffers. By 10 or 12, there's no real difference between the work a child does and the work of an adult. Boys trail after fathers in the fields, learning how to drive a plow, plant corn, mend fences, or shoe a horse. Girls stick close to their mothers, mastering the art of churning butter, sewing clothes, making candles, and tending gardens. There's no such thing as just housekeeping. Out here, every task is about keeping your family alive another day. And childhood isn't protected from the harshness of life. Children witness everything: births, deaths, injuries, and the bloody realities of butchering livestock. They see neighbors fight, sometimes with fists, sometimes with guns. You don't shelter your children from death because you can't. They need to learn early that loss is part of life. School, if you're lucky enough to have one nearby, is nothing like what you'd expect. The schoolhouse is a drafty box, freezing in the winter, stifling in the summer. One teacher, often barely more educated than the oldest students, tries to wrangle dozens of kids from 5 to 17, all crowded into a single noisy room. Supplies are a joke, maybe a few battered textbooks, some slates to write and erase over and over, and precious little paper. Whisper too loud or fail a recitation, and you might get a whipping right there in front of the class. That's just how it is. Most families, especially those out on the edge of settlement, don't have access to any school at all. Maybe a parent or older sibling teaches the basics, how to spell your name, add up a column of numbers, read the Bible. But most of what you learn isn't found in a book. You learn how to spot a storm coming by, the shape of the clouds, how to follow animal tracks, or how to treat a burn when there's no doctor for miles. And then there's the grim reality nobody wants to talk about: child mortality. Out here, 1 in 4 children doesn't live to see adulthood. The littlest ones are most at risk. Diseases that modern medicine shrugs off: measles, diphtheria, scarlet fever, whooping cough, run through communities like wildfires. If the sickness doesn't get you, an accident might. A fall into the well, a kick from a horse, a careless moment with a hunting rifle. Safety isn't a word anyone uses out here. Risks are part of life, every day. The emotional toll is brutal, for parents and children alike. Most kids grow up watching at least one sibling die. Parents expect it. Sometimes, if a child dies young, the next baby gets the same name, as if to keep the memory alive or just to fill the empty space. It sounds cold, but it's just the way things are. Death is so entwined with daily life that you learn not to get too attached, or at least you try. So, you want to survive the frontier? You need to learn how to eat what you can, accept what you can't change, and work harder than you ever thought possible. You grow up fast, with no guarantees about tomorrow. Out here, every meal, every day, is a test of your ability to adapt and endure. And if you think the hardships of food and childhood are bad, just wait until you see what happens when sickness or injury strikes. On the frontier, isolation means you're often your own doctor and nurse, and the community is your only safety net. Perhaps nothing illustrates the gulf between frontier and modern life more clearly than approaches to health and medicine. So let's take a hard look at what it really meant to survive, or not, when your body failed you. Let's get something straight, right from the start. Whatever ideas you brought with you about health and medicine in the Wild West, you're going to want to throw those out the window. Out here, if you fall ill or take a bad spill, don't expect anything resembling modern medical care. That whole notion of rushing to a doctor, getting a quick diagnosis, and walking out with a prescription, forget it. In most of these dusty settlements, you're lucky if there's a doctor at all. And if you do find one, chances are he's not much more than a jack of all trades. Maybe he apprenticed under someone for a few months, or sat in a medical college classroom for a season or two. His understanding of sickness and the human body is a patchwork of guesswork and superstition, with one foot still stuck in the Middle Ages. You're not dealing with white coats and sterilized instruments here. You're looking at a man who keeps his saws and knives in a leather roll, and who's as likely to balance your humors as he is to set your broken bone. Most of what passes for medicine is closer to folk magic, handed down from grandmothers and neighbors, each with her own set of herbal concoctions and odd rituals. Some of these remedies actually help, willow bark for pain, mint for upset stomach, but just as often, you're swallowing something that's more harm than help. One day, you're drinking tea made from wild flowers. The next, you're being bled with a razor or handed a spoonful of castor oil meant to purge bad humors from your gut. You might think, well, at least there were some medicines. Sure, but let me tell you about what that actually meant. Laudanum, a syrupy tincture of opium, is the go-to for pain. It'll numb you up. But after a while, you're not just fighting the aches in your body, you're fighting an addiction you can't shake. Mercury pills get handed out for everything from constipation to bad air, and all they do is slowly poison you. Most of the store-bought medicines are a wild gamble too. No regulations, no guarantees. You buy a bottle of Dr. Jones's miracle elixir, and you're just as likely to be chugging straight alcohol, turpentine, or something scraped up from the bottom of a barrel. Then there's surgery. Hollywood likes to show these quick, heroic operations, but the truth is much uglier. No anesthesia besides maybe a shot or two of whiskey or a dose of laudanum if you can spare it. You bite down on a stick and hope you pass out before the pain gets too much. Doctors don't know about germs, so their tools might get wiped on an apron, or not at all, before they dig into your flesh. If you get a nasty cut or a bullet in the leg, the solution isn't stitching you up. It's taking the limb off, sawed clean through, right there on the kitchen table, with your family holding you down. Infection is almost certain, and more than a few folks die from the cure instead of the injury. And childbirth? Well, that's a roll of the dice every single time. Women give birth at home, sometimes with a midwife if the family's lucky, but just as often with only a neighbor or a mother-in-law for help. There's no prenatal care, no way to spot a breech birth or a coming hemorrhage until it's already happening. If complications hit, there's nothing to stop them. 1 out of every 100 births ends in the death of the mother, and just as many newborns don't live to see their first sunrise. Women know, deep down, that each pregnancy might be the last thing they ever do. Husbands write in their journals about burying wives, one after another, raising children alone on a patch of wind-blasted dirt. It's not just the lack of medical care either. The daily grind wears you down. You're out in the fields from sunup to sundown, eating what you can grow and whatever you manage to hunt. Malnutrition is common, and it weakens you for whatever illness comes next. There's no such thing as a yearly checkup, no dentist to keep your teeth in your head. If you make it to 40, you're already considered one of the old-timers. Most folks don't. By the time you hit your 50s, if you do, you're likely stooped, aching and half-blind, carrying the scars of a lifetime's worth of accidents and hard labor. But if the physical dangers don't get you, the isolation just might. Out here, you're cut off from the world in a way most people today can't even imagine. You want to send a letter home? It'll take weeks, maybe months if it arrives at all. News travels at the pace of a tired horse or a worn wagon wheel. By the time you hear about a war or an election back east, it's already old news. Your world shrinks to the handful of families scattered across the prairie, and the horizon feels like it's closing in on you. For some, especially those who grew up in crowded towns and tight-knit communities, this loneliness is a slow poison. Women, in particular, write about the long stretches with no one to talk to except children too young to understand. They describe days when the silence presses in so hard it feels like a physical weight, and weeks when the only adult conversation is with a neighbor who stops by on their way to fetch water. Some folks crack under that pressure. The old-timers call it prairie madness, when the endless wind and open sky chip away at your mind until you're not yourself anymore. Some lash out or simply disappear, heading east and never looking back. Even in places that call themselves towns, you are not exactly surrounded by friends. Visiting a neighbor often means a half-day's ride, and nobody has time to spare when there's always work to be done. The few social gatherings are rare, usually tied to church services, barn raisings, or maybe a harvest festival if the crop comes in. When you do see a crowd, it's for a funeral or a wedding. No in-between. Church isn't just about faith. It's the lifeline that keeps the community from falling apart. The preacher might be the only one who can read, so he teaches the children. He settles arguments, organizes work parties, and tries to keep the peace when tempers flare. Building a church, a schoolhouse, or a meeting hall is a big deal. It's the moment a place stops being just a cluster of shacks and starts becoming a real town. These buildings aren't just for worship or learning. They're proof that people plan to stay, to plant roots, to build something lasting. When the community comes together to raise a barn or search for a lost child, it's not charity, it's survival. No one family can make it alone, no matter how tough or self-reliant they think they are. Hollywood loves to talk about rugged individualism, but out here, that's only half the story. The real trick is knowing when to ask for help and when to give it. That's what keeps the wolves, literal and figurative, at bay. This constant push and pull between going it alone and leaning on your neighbors shapes everything out here. You need the grit to get through each day, but you also need the community to survive the disasters you can't handle by yourself. It's a hard lesson for newcomers, and some never learn it. That tension between wanting to be independent and needing others runs through every conversation, every town meeting, every handshake. When the sun goes down and the prairie settles into darkness, it's not just your body that aches. Your mind feels the strain, too. You start to wonder how anyone manages to keep going year after year, facing down sickness, loss, and loneliness with nothing but stubbornness and the thin comfort of community. Out here, you realize, people aren't heroes in the way you see in movies. They're just ordinary folks doing their best, sometimes failing, sometimes finding a way through. They mourn their dead, patch up their wounds, and keep moving forward, not because they want to be legends, but because the land leaves them no other choice. Tonight, as you lie under a sky so dark it's almost suffocating, you can't help but wonder about the lives built and lost on these plains. What kept people going when it seemed like the world wanted nothing more than to grind them down? What did they dream about in between the storms and the sickness and the funerals? Would they recognize the world we live in now? A world overflowing with comfort and safety, built on the bones of their hardships? Or would they shake their heads at how easy we have it, not knowing the cost paid out here in sweat and blood? Those questions linger as you drift off, your thoughts haunted by the faces of those who endured, by the weight of their sacrifices. and by the quiet courage it took to survive a single day in the Wild West. Not through shootouts or showdowns, but through small acts of perseverance that Hollywood never bothered to show. And so, as the final embers of your campfire fade and the prairie slips into silence, you prepare for what's coming next. Because dawn is about to break on your final day in the Wild West, when that first light finally spills golden across the land. You catch yourself just standing there, taking it all in. You can't help it, you've got to savor the moment. The beauty out here is something no Hollywood set could ever fake. Those endless prairies ripple in the wind like waves on some wild inland sea. Jagged mountains claw at the sky, their peaks dusted with snow, even in July. Canyons split the earth wide open, swallowing the morning shadows. You could almost believe you're walking through a world untouched, a place where nature rules and humans just barely hang on. But don't get too swept up in the scenery. Out here, the relationship with the land isn't about peace or preservation. The frontier mindset is all about taking. Every tree, every animal, every drop of water, just another resource to be used up, never mind tomorrow. You see it everywhere. Timber crews clear-cut whole forests, leaving nothing behind but stumps and sawdust. Nobody's planting new trees. Nobody's thinking about what the land will look like for your grandchildren, or even your own kids. The rivers and streams, once crystal clear and teeming with fish, get choked and poisoned by the runoff from gold mines. Some creeks dry up altogether, their beds cracked and lifeless. The animals fare no better. Game gets hunted down relentlessly, especially anything big enough to feed a family or turn a profit. But nothing compares to what happens to the buffalo. If you'd come out here in your father's time, you'd have seen herds so vast they'd take an entire day to pass by, a living, snorting sea of fur and thunder. They say there were 30 to 60 million buffalo before white settlement really took hold. By 1884, barely 1,000 left. That's not just overhunting. That's a deliberate, systematic destruction. The government even encourages it, pushing for the total wipeout of the herds to starve out the plains tribes. You might hear someone quote General Sheridan talking about killing and skinning buffalo until none remain, just so civilization can move west. Whether he actually spoke those words or not, the policy is clear as day. Take away the buffalo, and you break the back of native resistance. That's environmental warfare, plain and simple. For the indigenous nations who've lived here for generations, this isn't just about losing an animal. This is the collapse of entire ways of life. Economies, religions, even family structures, all tied to the land and the creatures on it. You watch as people are forced from their ancestral homes, penned up on reservations. Their choices aren't really choices at all. Submit to reservation life. Keep fighting until there's no one left, or try to blend in and leave your old identity behind. The reservation itself is a kind of prison, designed to erase culture as much as contain it. You hear stories about children, young ones, barely old enough to remember their mothers, taken by force, packed off to government schools. Their hair is cut short, their language is forbidden, their ceremonies stamped out. Captain Richard Pratt, The man behind one of these schools came right out and said it. Kill the Indian, save the man. That's not just a policy. That's cultural destruction, dressed up as progress. And the pain, the trauma from those years, doesn't just disappear. It lingers, generation after generation, a wound that never quite closes. Sure, sometimes there's trade, sometimes there's uneasy cooperation. But by the time you're walking these dusty roads in the 1870s, most native communities are battered by a flood of settlers, soldiers, and greed. Armed resistance keeps flaring up, but it almost always ends in tragedy. You probably know the name Little Bighorn, June 1876, when Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors bring down Custer's 7th Cavalry. For a brief moment, hope flickers, but the response is swift, and the government's vengeance is brutal. Villages get burned, families destroyed, all in the name of pacifying the West. What makes it all the more tragic is that these nations had deep knowledge, agriculture suited to the land, complex governments, spiritual traditions that could have taught newcomers a thing or two. But those differences in land use and ownership, they're like two worlds colliding. For many native peoples, the very idea of owning land is as strange as bottling the wind. So when treaties are drawn up, disaster follows. Misunderstandings and bad faith deals pile up, sealing the fate of countless communities. And if you think it's just a story of white settlers and Native Americans, think again. The West is a patchwork of people from every corner of the earth, all bringing their own languages, religions, and customs. This diversity is a double-edged sword. On one hand, you get new skills, fresh ways of doing things. On the other, every difference can turn into a flashpoint, especially when times get hard and resources run short. Take the Chinese immigrants. They're the backbone of the railroads, the lifeblood of mining towns, yet they're met with suspicion and open hatred. Laws get passed just to keep them out. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. The first time America decides to block an entire group just because of where they're from. Chinese miners are harassed, taxed extra, or driven from their claims by mobs who want the gold for themselves. When the economy sours, entire Chinatowns are burned, families scattered to the winds. Mexican Americans, too, many of whom were here before the border shifted, lose land and water rights they were promised after the Mexican-American War. Treaties are ignored, property is taken through trickery or outright theft. Water systems that work for generations are tossed aside for English laws that make no sense in the desert. A family that once farmed acres may end up with nothing but dust. Even European immigrants find old grudges and prejudices following them west. Irish Catholics, German Lutherans, Scandinavians, Jews from Eastern Europe. They form their own neighborhoods, cling to their traditions, and hope for a little safety in numbers. But difference isn't always welcome. When jobs dry up or tempers flare, these communities can become targets for nativist anger. Don't forget the African Americans who head west after the Civil War. They're chasing freedom, hoping for land and dignity. Black cowboys make up as much as a quarter of the workforce on some ranches, but you'd never know it from the dime novels or movies. Black homesteaders build whole towns, but face resistance at every turn, sometimes violent, sometimes hidden behind paperwork and new laws. The reality, when you stack it all up, is a frontier that's nothing like the melting pot you've been told about. Each group brings something unique, but the power to decide whose culture survives and whose gets erased is never shared equally. The Wild West is a place of constant friction, where every gain for one group can mean loss for another. Hollywood never shows you how complicated it really was, how much struggle and sorrow lie beneath the surface of all those adventure stories. As the sun climbs higher, you can feel the weight of all this. Nature's beauty cut short by exploitation, cultures colliding, dreams dashed or stolen. It's no wonder that the scars of the past still run deep in the communities left behind. You stand at the edge of this sprawling, conflicted landscape, and you wonder what becomes of all these stories, who gets remembered, and who gets forgotten. Soon enough, the day will carry you into the heart of a frontier town that's changing faster than anyone can keep up. A place where history is being rewritten before your very eyes. Evening's falling, and you're standing smack in the middle of a frontier town that's changing faster than a gambler's luck at the faro table. Everything you thought you knew about the Wild West, those tales about lone prospectors, stubborn sodbusters, and scrappy independent ranchers, well, that's all shifting right under your boots. What you're really seeing here in the 1870s and 1880s is the great transformation of the West, and it's not one of those grand, sweeping Hollywood moments. It's gritty, relentless, and it leaves a lot of good folks in the dust. You probably pictured the West as a land of endless opportunity, where any man or woman with enough grit could stake out a patch and make it theirs. For a while, that was true. But now, the big outfits are moving in, and they're not playing by the same rules as the little guy. The iron horse, the railroad, has thundered into town, driving long, twisting tracks across the landscape, shrinking the continent in a way nobody thought possible. What used to take you months on a wagon now takes days in a cramped, smoke-filled train car, and those rails are changing everything. With every whistle and chuff, the railroad brings more than just passengers. It drags the East behind it, hauling in manufactured goods by the crate and shipping out the West's riches: timber, cattle, silver, wheat, straight to urban factories back east. Suddenly, your hand-dug mine or your patchwork family farm has to compete with corporations that have more money than God, and a whole army of men. You see it everywhere. Independent miners pushed out by company men and their dynamite, small ranchers squeezed by cattle barons who can buy the law, and family farms swallowed up by enterprises that stretch horizon to horizon. It's not just about money either. The power these big companies wield would make your head spin. Railroad men, mining bosses, timber magnates, they're the ones with a line to the lawmakers, shaping every rule and regulation. Water rights get bought up at auctions where only the rich can bid. Grazing land, mineral claims, timber stands. If you're not already connected or sitting on a pile of cash, you're left with next to nothing. The system gets rigged right before your eyes, and you realize that out here, freedom's starting to come with a price tag. And yet, this isn't only an economic change. The very bones of these towns are shifting. You walk down the main street, and it's not just muddy tracks and rickety wooden shacks anymore. There's a bank with a brick facade, a schoolhouse with bell ringing sharp in the morning air, a church planted right where the saloon used to be, the only gathering spot. You see a newspaper office and maybe even a little theatre where folks sit stiffly on hard benches, watching some travelling troupe. The wild, ramshackle edge gets shaved off, little by little, replaced by order, routine, and the creeping hand of civilization. For some, this is progress. For others, maybe you included, it's the death of the very thing that drew people west in the first place. Folks who came for freedom, for the chance to live by their own rules, now find city ordinances telling them what hours they can water their stock or where they can tie their horse. Some pack up and push further west, chasing that vanishing edge of the map. Others just grit their teeth and try to adapt, watching their old way of life erode with every new train whistle and every new law. And then there's the violence, the legends you know, the gunfighters and outlaws, the shootouts that echo through every Western movie. Those stories come from a very particular moment. See, before the law got its boots on, folks settled things with a gun or a rope and called it justice. Vigilante committees, posses, and personal grudges ruled the day in mining camps and cattle towns. But by the time the 1880s and 1890s roll around, sheriffs and marshals, judges and juries have started to take over. The towns get safer, or at least more predictable. But there's always a corner where the old ways hang on, where a man's life can still be ended over a card game or a claim jump. And those famous names you hear in stories, Wild Bill Hickok, Wyatt Earp, Billy the Kid, Jesse James, they're not the clean-cut heroes or pure villains Hollywood makes them out to be. Hickok, his aim was good, sure, but he also put bullets in more than one innocent bystander. Earp wore a badge when it suited him, but he was just as likely to run a gambling table or a brothel. Jesse James, painted as a Robin Hood, was really a former Confederate bushwhacker who left plenty of blood and pain behind him. Their lives were messy, full of contradictions, and most of the time they did what they needed to survive. As sunset bleeds into night, you can't help but wonder, why did these rough, uncertain days get turned into such tidy legends? Why do we cling to the myth of the West, long after the dust has settled and the real stories have faded into memory? Maybe it's because, just as the frontier itself was closing down, folks back east started to get nostalgic for a wildness they'd never truly known. Buffalo Bill Cody saw the opportunity and took it, putting on Wild West shows with staged gunfights and fake Indian battles for crowds hungry for excitement, even as the real West was being tamed by telegraph wires and town ordinances. The stories that filled the dime novels, the ones with brave sheriffs, dastardly outlaws, and noble settlers, weren't written by anyone who'd actually lived through these days. They were churned out by city writers, far from the dust and danger, who painted the West as a place where a man's courage and self-reliance could win the day, where good always triumphed over evil. That's what readers wanted, and it's what they got, a fantasy that had little to do with the truth. Hollywood, when it came along, only made those legends bigger. John Wayne riding into town, the dusty Main Street showdowns, the clear lines between heroes and villains, it all became part of America's imagination. These movies did more than entertain. They helped people feel better about the chaos of their own times, suggesting that American character had been forged in the fires of frontier struggle, that expansion and conquest were not just inevitable, but righteous. They made it look like civilization had simply triumphed over wilderness, as if progress always had the moral high ground. But what gets left out of those stories? Just about everything that makes the real West so complicated. You rarely see the indigenous nations whose worlds were torn apart, or the immigrant laborers who built the railroads and worked the mines for a pittance. Hollywood skips right over the environmental scars left behind by overgrazing, mining, and timbering, or the way big companies bent the law to their will. The real story isn't about simple good guys and bad guys. It's about people thrown together in a land that could kill you as quick as feed you, forced to cooperate, compromise, exploit, or just survive as best they could. Now, as you stand in this town on your last night in the West, you know in your bones why most folks today wouldn't last a single day out here. You're used to full pantries, hot showers, doctors a phone call away, and streets lit bright as day. Out here, survival means knowing how to patch a boot, tend a wound, fix a broken axle, or butcher a steer in the cold. It means going weeks without a proper bath, watching every mouthful of food, and facing down storms, droughts, or violence with nothing but your own stubborn will. The physical and mental toughness it takes to make it on the frontier, that's something most folks today can barely imagine. And yet, we're still drawn to this world. Maybe it's the honesty of it all. Out here, there's no hiding from your failures, and every day's work brings a result you can hold in your hands. Maybe it's the way neighbors rely on each other, no matter where they came from, because everyone faces the same hard wind and the same long winter. Or maybe it's the reminder that human beings, when pushed to their limits, can endure things that would break most of us today. The truth is, the real legacy of the frontier isn't just in the stories. It's in the way America still runs. The way we handle property and water, the tensions between local and federal power, our approach to land and resources, all of that was hammered out in places like this, often through bitter fights. Even the multicultural mix of the West, despite brutal attempts at forced assimilation, has shaped the diversity you see across the country today. The endless debate between individual freedom and the common good, between using up the land and saving it for the next generation, goes all the way back to these frontier days. For native peoples, though, the story of the West is no triumph. It's a story of loss, of ancient cultures shattered, and a fight for survival that goes on long after the cattle drives ended. Their voices remind us that the West wasn't empty land or a blank stage for American dreams. It was home to complex civilizations with knowledge and traditions that were nearly wiped out. Any honest look at the frontier has to hold both these truths at once: the courage and creativity of settlers building communities against impossible odds, and the devastation experienced by those pushed aside in the process. As you lie down, the sounds of the Old West wrap around you. There's the wind whispering through the grass, coyotes calling somewhere out in the darkness, maybe even the faint notes of a piano drifting from the saloon. These are the things that united everyone on the frontier, no matter their background, their language, or their dreams. The giant sky overhead, the harsh seasons, the wide open silence, These shaped every soul who tried to carve out a life here, binding people together in ways that still echo today. Tomorrow, you'll step back into your own time, carrying a new understanding you can't shake. Next time you watch a Western or crack open a book about the frontier, you'll see the cleaned-up version for what it is, a story made to comfort, not to reveal the messy, painful, and astonishing reality. You'll look around at modern life, endless food, warmth, medicine, gadgets, and realize just how much we've left behind. Maybe you'll even feel a pang for the practical skills that once meant survival, knowing how to mend, grow, build, and make do with whatever you had. And maybe, just maybe, you'll remember that the real magic of the West isn't in the gunfights or the gold. It's in the sweat and heartbreak of ordinary people, men and women and kids, scraping by with nothing but their wits and each other. Their story, unvarnished and real, holds more courage, cruelty, hope, and heartbreak than any movie could ever show. Their legacy is all around you, in the patchwork of cities and counties, in the way land is bought, sold, and fought over, in the stubborn streak of independence that still runs through the West. And yes, in the stories that continue to haunt our imagination. The true Wild West disappeared a long time ago. Technology, crowded cities, highways, and managed landscapes took its place. But if you listen close, you can still catch its echoes in the way folks talk, the way they hold on to old traditions, the way they argue about land and water and what it means to be free. The memory of this wild, unforgiving place still shapes how Americans see themselves, for better or worse. And it's not just about nostalgia. It's about understanding who we are, where we came from, and what kind of future we want to build. As night deepens, you start to feel the border between then and now start to blur. The challenges those frontier folks wrestled with, scarce resources, building communities from scratch, figuring out how to balance freedom and order, well, they haven't vanished. They've just changed shape. Maybe that's the real legacy of the West, not a neat set of answers, but a haunting list of questions each generation has to face all over again. Above you, the stars blaze as bright as ever, the same stars that led wagon trains across the prairie, that told farmers when to plant, that gave homesick immigrants a piece of home. In this moment, looking up, you feel a quiet kinship with every soul who's ever watched these skies, not knowing what tomorrow would bring. Out here, nothing was certain, except that life would be hard, and the beauty of the land would never let you forget it. So sleep comes at last, and with it, the kind of dreams only the West can give you. Dreams of a place both brutal and breathtaking, where human weakness and strength were on full display, where strangers became neighbors out of necessity, and where every hard day brought you face to face with the raw core of what it means to be alive. The real West wasn't a myth. It was a crucible, and its lessons, if you're willing to remember them, will stick with you long after the dust has settled.